the final sort of topic we really have to talk about is development and birth. We talked about the reproductive systems, the parts, what they do. We talked about fertilization. So now we'll talk about what happens after fertilization. So to begin, where is an egg cell usually fertilized? You see it? In the fallopian tube. So the fallopian tube is what we might call the site of fertilization. And as we talked about yesterday, after fertilization takes place, what do we call that first stage? The very first stage when the zygote. The zygote is a fertilized egg cell. We're going to talk about chromosomes in the next unit, but humans normally have 46 chromosomes. 23 chromosomes were carried in the sperm cell, 23 were carried in the egg cell. After fertilization takes place, the zygote has 46, the proper number. And then when that zygote starts to grow, each of those cells that are produced from that zygote have 46 chromosomes. And that zygote begins to grow into a little clump of cells. And after it goes through that first division, we start to call it an embryo. So that egg takes a little while to travel. So it's not moving very quickly. It takes almost a week for it to go from being ovulated to getting into the uterus. But as it's sort of making that journey, it's dividing, it's growing. Not so much in size, but it's growing in number of cells, especially. As it drops into the uterus, it's going to attach to the wall of the uterus somewhere. As we know, the uterus has been thickening. Hormones within a woman's reproductive cycle cause the uterine lining to thicken, blood vessels to grow, to provide for an environment for this embryo to attach.
If a woman, like, say she got pregnant, but it's still like in the fallopian tube, it hasn't reached the uterus yet, would they start to have the side effects of pregnancy?
No. So a woman typically doesn't, usually a woman wouldn't know she's pregnant until at least a month or so. And what's one of the first signs? Missed period. That sort of often might clue a woman in that she's pregnant. There might be there are changes in hormone levels that happen once that embryo implants. So sometimes a woman might have certain feelings of that things that might change, but typically a woman probably doesn't know until after she's missed her first period, but she can find out earlier.
Is there any truth to like the thing where like you crave weird things if you're pregnant?
Yeah, a lot of women will say that during pregnancy, their tastes change, their sensitivity to certain smells, they crave certain foods. So yeah, there is something to be said for that. So the embryo makes its way into the uterus. It attaches to the lining of the uterus, and then the area where it attaches, an organ starts to form. It's called the placenta. So the placenta is crucial for the survival of the embryo, the fetus. The placenta is, we talked about the placenta back when we talked about mammals. So the key thing to remember is that the blood from the mother does not go into the fetus. Okay? It goes next to it. In the placenta, the mother's blood vessels are right next door to the blood vessels from the embryo, and therefore nutrients, oxygen, carbon dioxide, waste can diffuse back and forth between the mother and the embryo of the fetus. Okay? So that exchange of materials happens in that placenta. Connecting the placenta to the embryo is the umbilical cord. And the umbilical cord basically is just, it has a few blood vessels in it, carrying the fetus's blood to the placenta and back from it. So a lot of times people make a mistake of saying, like, or answering on a quiz, like, they say the umbilical cord is what provides nutrients to the fetus. But it's not the umbilical cord. It's actually the placenta where nutrients are being provided for the fetus. So the umbilical cord, blood vessels enter into the abdomen of the embryo and fetus, and then they feed into the circulation of the fetus. So different organisms have different gestational periods. That's the amount of time it takes for the offspring to grow to full maturity. What is it in humans? What is our gestational period?
9 months.
Yeah, we sometimes say 9
40
months.
weeks.
40 weeks is probably a better way to talk about it. 40 weeks. It's probably a little longer than 9 months. So 40 weeks is sort of the average. 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after is still considered normal. Earlier than 38 weeks would be an example of a premature birth, when the baby was born before it was fully developed. And the earlier the baby is born, the more care it's going to need, medical attention, the more risky it is for the health of that baby. As far as after 40 weeks, usually the doctors won't allow a woman to go past 42 weeks, past 2 weeks past their due date. They'll typically induce pregnancy. There's medications that a doctor can give a woman that cause them to go into labor and start having a baby. So I've been using these terms, embryo, fetus. So actually the difference, we call the developing offspring an embryo from the time of ovulation or fertilization until 8 weeks. In the time period from 8 weeks to birth, we call it a fetus. So that's the terminology. So this would be a picture of a fetus.
What's like the first thing that develops when a embryo was like first connected to the uterus wall or whatever?
Yeah.
What's like the last thing right before it's born?
The last thing to develop
Yeah.
is typically one of the last things that's needed. Can anyone guess what it is?
What hole?
Skin.
Not a bubble? I think it's eyes.
What? Yeah, the lungs.
What?
Why lungs?
Because they don't. The fusion. They don't need them until later.
Yeah, so whenever the embryo, the fetus is growing inside, it never takes a breath. It never needs to breathe while it's in the womb. Okay? In fact, usually its lungs are filled with amniotic fluid because it doesn't need to breathe. It also doesn't need to eat. It also doesn't need to urinate or defecate. Okay? Everything, all of the absorption of nutrients and oxygen and removal of waste is happening in the placenta. So the first breath that the baby takes is after it's born. So the lungs are one of the last organs to develop. In fact, with premature births, one of the biggest risk factors is that the lungs are not developed yet. And so often, child born premature has to be put on a ventilator that sort of breathes for them, because the lungs are one of the last organs to develop.
What's the first one?
Well, it's hard because the tissues start to form, nerve tissue. Like in the early stages of development, different layers of cells start to take on certain functions. They become nerve tissue and circulatory tissue. So the rudimentary spinal cord and brain forms very early, and patches of cells which will become the heart form early. So there's a variety of ways. So this is sort of later. This is a fetus. Okay, this is a little later on during development. And so if we look inside of the uterus at the developing fetus, we can label the parts again. The same parts are here. The fallopian tubes are still there. The outer muscular organ holding the fetus is the uterus. Now, like I said the other day, the uterus can expand significantly. Basically, it swells up to fit the entire fetus inside of it. The placenta forms, it can form in different places. It can form on the right side, the left side, up higher, down lower. Sometimes it forms too low and can sort of block the passageway for the fetus to actually be born. And so sometimes in those cases, a C-section would have to be done to safely get the baby to be born. Attached is the umbilical cord. There's also a membrane surrounding the fetus and embryo as it grows. It's called the amniotic sac, and it's filled with fluid, amniotic fluid. This amniotic fluid helps to sort of cushion the fetus, so it's not sort of bouncing around there, it's just kind of floating in a little pool of water. We have the fetus, and then the cervix. The opening. When a woman's pregnant, the cervix is sort of plugged. Okay? And we'll talk more about labor and delivery in a minute, but that eventually that sort of it's plugged with mucus that eventually might come out.
What is happening when you say like the water breaks?
Yeah.
Is that
So,
the embryonic fluid?
yep. So when a woman is about to go into labor, one of the first signs that she's going to be having the baby soon is her water breaks. And I'm sure you've heard that. Because what happens is, as labor is starting, this amniotic sac ruptures, it breaks. And so the amniotic fluid that's inside will then start leaking out. Okay, so it leaks out, comes out through the vagina. That's the amniotic fluid, that means her water is broken. Typically, a doctor doesn't want a woman to go more than about 24 hours from the time her water breaks till she has the child. Because once that amniotic sac is broken, sort of the seal protecting that fetus from bacteria and so forth is broken, so there's a chance that an infection could start it. So water breaking is one of the signs of a woman having the baby soon. So we look at sort of what things look like at various times. Here we have different stages through the embryo stages to the later fetal stages. Here, some of these are actual pictures, so they can take a little fiber optic camera and get a picture of what the fetus looks like. There's one photographer that makes these videos and movies of what things look like inside of the developing embryo.
Whoa, that's a way different change. From 16 weeks to 18 weeks. He looks like he's like, the one looks like he's a gummy bear, the other one looks like he could like pick him
So
up.
this was from the bodies exhibit that we talked about. This was really controversial because they were displaying the remains of not only a woman that was pregnant, but also her fetus. So when I was reading a little bit about the bodies exhibit, first of all, some people have a ethical problem with displaying human remains for people sort of viewing, and displaying of fetal remains or the remains of children is even more controversial. So that was something that that was people discussed and debated when this was coming about. So let's talk just briefly about some cell division. When a cell divides, so if you get a cut on your skin, to fill in those missing cells that are going to heal you, your body makes new cells. For you to grow taller, okay, your bone needs to add extra tissue in your muscles and your skin, so new cells are created. So cells are capable of reproducing. And they do this, and there's two types of ways that cells can divide. They're called meiosis and mitosis. And so you will have to know the difference between them. So meiosis, notice in this What the eyes are the sperm cells.
What a picture.
That's for a reason.
Wow,
That's because
that's
meiosis
Oh my
happens
God.
in order to produce sperm and egg cells. The only time in our bodies that meiosis happens is to produce sperm cells or egg cells. Because sperm and egg cells are unique. Do you know what's unique about them?
They're different.
Not so much the size. I just mentioned it earlier.
One's in a female, one's in
No.
not a female. Oh, you guys know this.
Has to do with. Oh, you got an idea before I give a hint?
Yeah, is it because like they have like the I forgot what it's called. Like,
Chromosomes, yeah. What were we going to say about the chromosomes?
they sort of have like they have to have like all of these chromosomes.
The sperm and egg cell do?
Ooh, I got it, I
You're
got it.
close, but not quite. Big shot? Well, they are, but looking for something else.
They only have 23 chromosomes and
Yes, sperm and egg cells, they only have 23 chromosomes each. They get half the normal number of chromosomes. Why do they get half?
Because they add up.
Yeah, because they're going to merge in fertilization, and then they'll be back up to the full number. So meiosis is a type of cell division that reduces the number of chromosomes in half. It takes cells that were 46 chromosomes and turns them into sperm or egg cells that only have 23 chromosomes. This is in humans. Other species have different chromosome numbers. Mitosis
Oh, mitosis.
is a type of cell division that maintains chromosome number. So if you're growing taller and your bone tissue needs more cells, they are produced by mitosis. Because the cells in your bones have to have the right number, 46 chromosomes. You get a cut on your skin to heal, those new skin cells are formed by mitosis. It makes identical cells for growth and repair. All right, so let's look at this. So these would be normal body cells. What would this be?
Spermy boy.
Sperm cell, egg cell. So what type of cell division would produce these? Meiosis would produce those cells. What do we call it when this and this combine?
Fertilization.
Yes, these gametes
Let's go.
combine, and that process is called fertilization. What would we call this cell?
Zygote.
A zygote. What process takes this zygote and forms it into a small embryo? Which one?
Mitosis.
Mitosis, because the chromosome number stays the same. And what forms these cells?
Mitosis.
Mitosis. And mitosis happens millions of times to form an entire living person.
Oh, he's so happy. Look at him. It's weird.
So, as we review this, sperm cell,
Yeah.
in humans, how many chromosomes?
33.
Egg cell,
43.
zygote,
46.
46.
Fertilized egg known as a zygote.
Zygote. Oops. The sperm and egg cell, the general
A
term,
gamete.
is gamete.
I want to pronounce it as
And they are produced by what process?
meiosis.
Meiosis. And so therefore they have
20. Oh,
half as many chromosomes.
I was so confused. I was like,
All other body cells divide by
mitosis.
mitosis.
Therefore, gametes have 0.3 as many people.
Alright, just a quick review. We just did this, but I don't know why this looks like a full-grown human.
Yeah, why is
It's
it
kind of
like?
weird. But anyway,
Yes, hair.
babies are born with hair. My oldest daughter had tons of hair when she was
Looks like
born.
I do.
Probably
Kind of
is.
looks like- Or what was the last airbender's name?
Aang?
Yeah.
No, Aang had a weird little blue thing on his head that I didn't like.
Arrow.
No, I was watching up like that.
It was an arrow.
Because I'm not a weed.
Because I'm not a weed.
This is, what is this?
That looks like that looks like if you had dirty pants and you
That
sat on
looks
a
like two
white
potatoes
couch.
squished together.
But
Tell me
the
about
grown
that.
version looks very similar, Lily.
Oh, it looks like
This
it
is
looks
actually a picture of Mr. Akiri when he was in the womb.
It looks like
What?
Oh.
That is a sonogram.
Wait,
That's
where?
wrong. I said it was the
I
This
thought
is
those were
his
lips on top.
skull.
It looks like
That's his spinal cord.
What?
His hands and legs will be over here somewhere. He put this in there and put this caption. but
Wait,
obviously
the-
it's
tell-
so-
the most
Tell me-
ugly.
Tell me the top one doesn't look like lips. Go back to that.
No, so ultrasounds are what's used to make those images. So we can get a picture of the inside of the womb using a sonogram. Basically, it uses sound waves to make a picture of tissue inside the body. It can be used for other things as well. But that's how sonograms are made. Nowadays, they
Looks like
have
he's made out of peanut
these
butter.
three-dimensional sonograms that give you give a parents like an actual three-dimensional image of what their fetus looks like.
I like how.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about these about birth. So
birth.
the typical
Oh, that is.
typical process for birth is, like I said, often a woman when she's towards the end of her pregnancy, one of the first things often happens is her water breaks. It doesn't always actually happen. Sometimes the doctor might do it when she gets to the hospital, just puncture her amniotic sac to encourage labor to continue. And so once her water breaks, the first things that happen is called labor. So what's happening in labor is the uterus, which we know is a muscle, is contracting involuntarily. The woman doesn't control it, it just happens. And so in the very beginning stages, these contractions of the uterus are relatively mild. Okay? They're not really painful, they're not very intense, and they're spaced out. They might start, a woman might get one every 15 minutes or 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But as labor is progressing, these contractions start to be more intense, and they start to get closer together. And what's happening in labor is the contractions of the uterus are causing the cervix to start to dilate and to become thinner. Because the cervix, which starts off basically closed, needs to dilate to 10 centimeters in diameter to allow the actual fetus to be born. So the process of getting these contractions is causing the cervix to dilate over time. So these contractions get more and more intense, closer and closer together. At some point, many women, most women, would then go to the hospital once their contractions are maybe 5 minutes apart or so. Some women choose to have birth in their own home. You can do that. Some women choose to have a midwife, a woman that's trained in helping women through the birthing process. They might have a midwife with them at the hospital or with them in their home. Depends on what the woman chooses to do. So after the cervix has completely dilated and it's 10 centimeters dilated, then labor starts to move into the next stage, okay, which is delivery. So in the delivery portion, the woman is actually, she takes conscious control really, and she pushes the baby out. The baby moves through the cervix into the vagina, and over time, eventually the baby comes out. It's head first, typically, is the usual way. That's the easiest way for the baby to be born. The head comes out first. The shoulders are the widest part. As the baby comes out, it kind of rotates so that the shoulders can fit through the pelvis. And then once the shoulders have come out, then the rest of the baby comes out pretty easily. Sometimes the baby, however, is in the wrong position. it's called in the breech position, where the feet are first, or the butt is first, and it's harder for a woman to deliver a breech position. Now there are times when there's a problem with the health of the child. There's a problem with the health of the mother. Labor is just taking so long and it's not progressing that they may choose to take the baby out by a C-section. In a C-section, a woman is anesthetized. She's still awake. She's not unconscious. She's awake. However, she's numbed, so she can't feel any of this. And the doctor makes an incision through her skin and her abdomen, next through the abdominal muscles, then her uterus, and then beneath that is the amniotic sac. If it's not been ruptured, the doctor would rupture it, and then reach in and take the baby out through this incision in her abdomen rather than it being born through the vagina. So that's what a C-section is. A C-section takes a longer recovery for the mother because all of those cuts need to heal, the muscles and so forth need to heal. So doctors try to avoid C-section if they can. Once the baby is born, the placenta inside breaks away from the uterus, and the placenta has to be delivered after the baby. So the baby comes out, and then a few minutes later, usually the placenta comes out. And if you're in the room for the travel, you can see a big mass of blood vessels, it looks like. That comes out afterwards. And then somebody will cut the baby's umbilical cord. It's no longer needed. So that at first they tie off the base of the umbilical cord, and then they put this plastic clamp ahead of that, and then sometimes the father cuts it, sometimes the nurse cuts the umbilical cord. It's just this rubbery, like hose kind of thing. You can cut it. And then what's left is there's a little part of the umbilical cord about maybe an inch long that is still attached to the baby. And because it got tied off, it eventually over the next few weeks turns black and falls off, and then the person's left with a normal belly button. So that's the general process of birth. Question, Colin?
How big is King Samuel?
About this big.
Oh, I was thinking like the size of a water, like this big. I was
No,
like,
you're
that
bigger
does not
than
seem
that.
alright.
Other questions
This isn't like a metric system.
about birth, delivery, labor? All right, let's finish with twins.
Yay, twins. Oh, yes,
We can watch them maybe Monday. Yes.
What's a CNC section?
A C-section stands for a cesarean section. I believe people say that Caesar was born via C-section, and that's what gave it the name. I don't exactly know that. So, identical twins, how do they form?
The joys.
They split.
They split. What do you mean? What split?
The embryo.
No? The embryos. So, identical twins form when the zygote is dividing, it forms an embryo. But for some reason, that embryo then splits into two separate things. And each of those goes on and develops into a baby, a fetus. Now, because they came from the same sperm cell and the same egg cell, they have the same chromosomes, they have the exact same DNA. They are the same sex, and they will look identical to each other.
They have to be the same.
Yeah.
Say,
Because they have the same chromosomes, they are the same sex. So then how would fraternal twins be formed?
It should. Oh, I know.
Ali?
Two different sperm cells and two different eggs.
Yeah. So sometimes when a woman ovulates, she releases not just one egg from her ovary, but she might release 2 or even 3 eggs. If they all get fertilized by sperm cells, they all grow into an embryo and fetus, and she's pregnant with 2 or 3 fetuses. But because they came from 2 or 3 different egg cells and 2 or 3 different sperm cells, they have different genes, different chromosomes. They could be boy-girl, they could be boy-boy. They're basically no more alike than brothers and sisters. Okay? They're just like brothers and sisters that happen to be born at the same time. So they're no more genetically alike than brothers and sisters. Now there are also times when identical twins start to form. However, the two cells that were split actually stay touching each other. And as they develop, they are actually physically connected. They share certain tissues. So they're identical twins that are connected at some point. They're always connected like part to like part, head to head, torso to torso, hip to hip. So, did you ever see this TV show about Brittany and Abby? They are conjoined twins.
They look pretty happy.
The most famous, or the twins that actually gave Siamese twins their name, I believe, were Chang and Ang Bunker. They were born in what was then called Siam. Today it would be called Thailand. But they actually were conjoined twins. They lived in the 1800s. They were joined at the chest. And actually they came to America, and P.T. Barnum brought them on tour as sort of part of the circus freak show. They eventually, so let me finish the story. They eventually settled in North Carolina. They got married. Chang and Ang Bunker married twin sisters. They were not conjoined twin sisters. So they originally all lived in the same house, but their wives started to argue. So they would go from one house to another. So they lived with families for one time. They had dozens of children as well.
What?
So how that happened, I know how that happened, but the details are probably a little strange. Yeah, depending on where they were connected, it was.